Good afternoon and welcome to OCC's Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation. We are so glad you are here and grateful you chose to spend this time with us. Before we begin, there's just a few quick housekeeping notes to help make sure that our time runs smoothly. All attendees are currently muted and their cameras are disabled. Throughout the program, you are invited to share your questions or reflections using the Q&A feature. We welcome your thoughtful engagement and we offer time for questions later on in the program. Today is more than a program. It's an invitation to listen, to learn, and to consider how each of us can take meaningful action in our own sphere of influence. We are truly honored to be joined by an outstanding group of panelists and campus leaders. This webinar is being recorded so that we can all be fully present in this moment and focus on reflection, conversation, and connection. Dr. King once reminded us life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Today, as we gather in his legacy, we hold that question close to us, thinking not only about history, but about our responsibility right now and moving forward. To officially begin our program, it is my great honor to welcome our Chancellor, Peter Provenzano, who will provide today's opening remarks.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome everyone to Oakland Community College's 2026 Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation. This year's theme is Beyond the Dream, exploring the impact of Dr. King's vision, and it invites us to reflect on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s enduring legacy, the influence of his leadership, and our responsibility to carry that forward in our world today. It's truly an honor to once again gather as a college community for this important conversation about justice, leadership, and our shared responsibility to one another. Because at Oakland Community College, we transform lives through education. We are committed to the success of every student across all socioeconomic backgrounds, belief systems, cultures, identities, and lived experiences. And our mission is to provide an education that inspires, enlightens, and prepares students to navigate the world and positively shape it. So we're hoping that the many insights that are offered today will inspire all of us to reflect honestly, engage thoughtfully, and move forward with the courage and compassion that is needed, because we each have a role in building Dr. King's vision of a beloved community that's rooted in dignity, fairness, as well as mutual respect. And so now I'd like to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude to all of those who made today's convocation possible. Thank you to our Office of Institutional Standards and Practices, our expert panelists that have taken the time to join us, and each of you for participating today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our Vice Chancellor of Advancement, Christina Ayar, who will recognize our MLK Student Essay Contest winners. Christina.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the OCC Foundation, it is my honor to announce the winners of our first ever Martin Luther King Jr. Essay Scholarship Contest titled The Dreams Lived in Me, Voices of a New Generation. This contest was provided and presented by the Office of Institutional Standards and Practice in partnership with the Social Science Department. We invited students to reflect on how Dr. King's vision and justice, courage, and compassion continues to live on through their voices, actions, and leadership today. The essays we received were thoughtful, powerful, and inspiring. They remind us that Dr. King's dream is not only remembered, it is being actively carried forward by our future leaders. I would like to thank the MLK Essay Contest Committee, whose time, care, and thoughtful review made this contest possible. We are also very deeply grateful to an anonymous donor and the OCC Foundation for their generosity in supporting student voices and student success. It is now my pleasure to recognize our scholarship recipients. Third place, the recipient of a $200 scholarship, Fathia Khalid. Second place, the recipient of a $350 scholarship, Angel Ballard. And the first place, the recipient of a $500 scholarship, Serena Chrysopoulos. Please join me in congratulating these outstanding students for their achievement and for honoring Dr. King's legacy through their words, vision, and commitment to change. Thank you and congratulations to all of our winners. At this time, I'll turn the program back over to Christina Marshall.
Hi, everyone. At this time, we are going to hear from one of our students who will be singing Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the day when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the light gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand,
Well, we want to thank our student area for that wonderful rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing. And so now the moment you've all been waiting for. It is my honor and my pleasure to introduce our panelist as well as today's moderator. So at this time, I will introduce each one of our panelists as they come on, as well as our moderator, and then we'll get this party started. So first, we'll begin with Dr. Belinda Biscoe. Next, we have Dr. Jojo McManus. Then we have Mr. Rodney Ursery, and followed by our moderator, our very own Chief of Staff and Strategy, Dr. Steve Simpson. Let's welcome them all.
Perfect. Thank you, Christina. And I'll give us a second to get everybody pinned there. I want to thank everybody for coming out this afternoon. I know the snow in Michigan kind of threw us for a loop, but we're very excited about the panel and the rest of the afternoon together. So I think before we jump in, I wanted to give, instead of me reading everyone's bio, I wanted to give each of the panelists an opportunity just to share a little bit about themselves and their background in this work. And so I thought maybe we could go from top to bottom, and Belinda, will start with you, and then we'll go to Jojo and then Rodney, if you wanted to take a few minutes just to introduce yourself to the group. Oh, Belinda, I think you're still on mute there.
Thank you, and thank you for including me as a part of this wonderful panel. I think this is especially important for me before I introduce myself because I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'll say a little bit more about that as the panel gets underway. But I grew up in the same place, the same city as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But I am currently the Senior Associate Vice President for Outreach in the College of Continuing Education at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. I have responsibility for about 1,400 employees at the university and spend most of my time just dealing with a lot of program development because most of our funding comes from federal and state funding. I also am a research psychologist by training and spend a lot of my time in community efforts. My background in general has focused on continuing education, psychology and research, workforce development, social justice and diversity, public radios as sort of an interest of mine. Under me, we also have an American Indian Institute, and we spend quite a bit of time dealing with issues of health, mental health, substance abuse, and prevention. That's probably more than you wanted to know, and so I'm going to end it right there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Jojo.
First, I want to say congratulations to the essay winners. Thank you to Christina and everybody that invited me. And really thank you to, I think it was Aria that sang the Black National Anthem. It brought me back to my days at Florida A&M University. And I always enjoy hearing my preferred national anthem. So I'm an anti-racist educator, an inclusive excellence advisor. I'm the author of Brothers Insight, Guidance on Defeating Racism and Advancing Freedom. And I've served in everything from faculty and teacher education through the role of Senior Diversity Officer. I currently work at Tri-C, Cuyahoga Community College in Ohio. And my primary work other than that is as an advisor to diversity officers and presidents around the country, particularly now as we're trying to navigate through what's going on today. So I'll leave it there, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Rodney, we'll throw it to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me this afternoon for this very important occasion. I am elated to join the panel I thank Christina for inviting me to participate. To just share some reflection briefly on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and the current challenges and opportunities for progress. This has been a life mission for me over the last 30 years. I developed my professional background in human rights, which encompass civil rights. And sometimes people think it's a dichotomy there, but in fact, the underlying purpose, I've served, including in those 30 years, as an advocate as well as neutral evaluator and assessor, different forms, the workplace, housing, and public and private sector, alongside community partners. And throughout my career, I focused on making systems fair, particularly with law and regulations and governing policies. And as we know, just because something is legal doesn't necessarily equate to fairness. I've had the opportunity to work with Tennessee Human Rights Commission and currently with Tennessee Department of Transportation. Along the way, I've developed the knowledge of, having applied my knowledge in practical ways in leadership roles with the Tennessee Human Rights Commission in housing, public accommodations, as well as employment, fairness, a broad spectrum across board prior to coming to TDOT. And I look forward to the discussion that we have forward today.
Great. Thank you so much. On behalf of LCC, I want to thank all of you for being here today. And just as a practical housekeeping matter, the panelists, we talked a little bit beforehand, and they're open to fielding questions as we go. So to the best of my ability, I'm going to, if you could use the question and answer function, I will try and field those in real time so we can slide them in where they seem most appropriate. But there will also be time just for general questions at the end. But please feel free to ask questions as we go. There's a lot to talk about and a lot we could talk about. And so the more you can kind of participate, I think the richer the discussion will be. To kind of start it off, and I'll open it to whoever wants to go first. It's been, from a public policy and a political perspective, it's been quite a year of change as we come into 2026. And I guess the question is, as you reflect on Dr. King's vision for America and some of the civil rights and diversity work of the past 30, 40 years and beyond, how do you kind of place that in the current context and what people see on the news and all of the policy and regulatory changes that may have impacted you? How do you place Dr. King's vision and sort of reconcile it with the current political climate that we see? And I'll open that up. Would anyone want to go first?
Well,
Christina said everyone would want to talk, and then there was silence. So
I'll just
Linda, you going
jump.
to take it?
There will be
I'll jump.
silence. We're
I'll
good.
jump in, but don't shoot the first person who opens up here. Um, for me, Dr. King's vision resonates deeply with where we are today because, in many ways, I feel that we're still grappling with the very issues he named many, many decades ago: justice, equity, belonging, and the moral responsibility we have to one another. One of the things I didn't say about myself is from a very young age, growing up in Atlanta, I feel like I've spent my whole life dealing with marginalized groups and communities, from starting a school for homeless children and their families to creating the first substance abuse treatment program in Oklahoma for women who are addicted and their children. But I grew up in Atlanta in the segregated South during the height of the civil rights movement. I was a child, a preteen, and a teen while Dr. King was actively advancing the civil rights movement. And while I was was not on the front lines marching, I was actually living the reality he was trying to change. I attended segregated schools, lived in segregated neighborhoods, and later found myself among the first Black student in spaces that had never been designed with people like me in mind. And because of that, I see Dr. King's vision. I don't see Dr. King's vision as history, but I see it more as a through line. And for me, one of the most important aspects of his vision was that it was really beyond laws and policies. Dr. King spoke about the moral architecture of society, the idea that progress is not just about access, but also about dignity, not just about representation, but about belonging. And today we have more access than ever before to education, to technology, to information. But access alone, as we all know, has not solved the inequities that we all see and that many of us experience. In some ways, what it's really done is revealed how deep and persistent these inequities are. So I think the challenge we face today is different from the 1960s, but no less serious. I think inequity is more subtle, more systemic, and sometimes harder to name. But we see it in the educational outcomes and healthcare disparities. I mean, Black women, for example, have the highest morbidity and mortality rates in childbirth of any group of women in this country. We see it in these disparities in terms of who feels safe expressing their full identity and whose voices are valued or whose voices are dismissed. We also see polarization and we see fatigue. People who are tired of talking about race, justice, and inclusion, even though I think we all know that this work remains unfinished. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunity. We all know that Dr. King believed deeply in education as a tool for liberation, and that resonates strongly with most of us today. I think institutions like community colleges, especially like Oakland Community College, are really uniquely positioned to carry forward this vision and carry forward Dr. King's vision. I see community colleges like Oakland as gateways and places where first generation students, working adults, historically marginalized communities can transform their lives. And that's exactly the kind of space I believe Dr. King believed could bend the arc of history towards justice, which is something that we all are familiar with his quote on that. And in closing, I would say that what his vision to me calls us to do now is to move from awareness to responsibility, from good intentions to courageous actions, from performative commitments to sustained, meaningful change. I think it asks us to examine not only society, but ourselves, our assumptions, our comfort, and our willingness to act when it's inconvenient. For me personally, being the first for so many times as a kid and a young teen growing up in Atlanta, it came with opportunity, but it also came with a lot of costs. And I'll say something about that with later questions. But Dr. King understood that progress often requires sacrifice, resilience, and hope in the face of uncertainty. And his vision continues, I think, to remind us that progress is not inevitable, but it is intentional. So, in today's moment, his challenge, I think, and his message challenge us to ask, how are we using our positions? How are we using our voices and our institutions to create a more just and humane society, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us? And a quote, and I'll end with this, that I use sometimes is, we can't choose our ancestors, but neither can our descendants. What will people say about us who come after us? And that's the question we have to grapple with.
Thank you so much. Rodney or Jojo, I'd leave that open to you. Kind of the question is, how do we place Dr. King's vision for America within the current climate and the challenges and opportunities we see in front of us?
Well, just very briefly to follow up on Dr. Bisco's comments about, as you know, in regards to that question, what's resonating now. One thing that we must realize and conceptualize is that Dr. King's vision was not a moment in time or a moment in history. As Dr. Belinda said, is something that is very pertinent today and relevant, as we all are aware, no matter what side. And unfortunately, you know, polarization is a realistic thing that exists now, and with more people, it appears to be just as predominant, but not as racist or overtly unfair, but it still is pervasive. One thing that I look at Dr. King's vision is that it was a blueprint for a just society. He challenged institutions, not just individuals, to examine how policies, practice, and power structures expand as well as restrict opportunities for everyone. Today, we're faced with some of the same challenges. They may look a little different on the surface because of technologies and types of polarization. You know, to me, no matter what side of the coin you're on, or if you're just in the middle, we are in an environment that seems to be divide and conquer. When, you know, when we look at society as a whole, we think of a collective group. And one of the things that I talk about where I currently am, and I'm the lead on, is the department's community fair. And I emphasize the unity in community. It's pronounced in even how we display the word. And so, but we still got to get to that unity. We may be seen as a better community, but we have a long way to go before we really appreciate and recognize the unity aspect. So, you know, like I said, with the technologies, polarization, and we still got a big divide in the economic arena. You know, we got economic inequalities until people want to try to pinpoint the cause. Historically, there's never been a single cause for this predicament, but over time, with the overtone, and unfortunately, you know, our country has some ills that have caused a widespread continuation. And so the main thing is to understand that Dr. King's vision is not a moment in time, it's not a historical event. There's something that you can say, well, in the 50s and 60s, but also is present today. We have opportunities that, you know, through data, more voices, more awareness, more avenues for really getting out and exercising what we can do as individuals. Dr. King reminded us that progress requires moral courage, the willingness to align our values with actions. And sometimes that may be uncomfortable, but nonetheless, it was never a civil rights movement, but rather it's a civil rights moving. And that's what direction that this country, because of today, we're navigating division, mistrust, the real fear, collective fear about our future. And so, you know, it's still prominent now. And I'll close with this. although, we have more awareness and voices than ever before, Dr. King challenges us to ask ourselves individually, what are we doing with the influence we have right now? And that question, it was prevalent then, it was a question he posed then, and it's very much so relevant today.
Thank you. Jojo, let me kind of throw the second question into the mix, and I'll let you kind of continue on the first, because I think what I've heard a lot of is responsibility, action, and then sort of the breadth and depth of the challenges in front of us or the opportunities for improvement in front of us. And I guess I think a lot of times institutions and even people are sort of paralyzed by the enormity of the challenge in front of them. And so I think it would be really helpful to hear from each of you. And Jojo, we'll start with you. Like, how do you prioritize those challenges, and how do you create action that's tactical and will produce results amidst all these seemingly very, very important priorities? And just hear a little bit about how you focused your work in institutional response and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I'm thinking back to the song that we started with, right? And part of the lyrics talks about weary years, right? And I think James Weldon Johnson, who wrote the song, really hit what we're going through right now. These are weary years, right? And there's a couple of things that I think we can take from Dr. King's larger than what we usually talk about message and vision, right? And I think a lot about the connections he made between social, economic, and political systems. And his work went so far beyond the "I Have a Dream" speech that we pull out every February. And I think if we really think about what those intersections look like, that's where we are right now. It's the challenges that we're facing in all of those arenas. And I think back to what both Belinda and Rodney mentioned before about the moral courage and responsibility that Dr. King would often cite and speak on. And as I think about the work I've done over the years, I've tried everything, right? When I was young, I thought my brother in particular and I would go to other schools and we would try to talk to other students, particularly around issues of race and racism, but also around depression in general. And we thought we should have solved it. It was like, man, we've been doing this for a few years. It doesn't seem to be fixing everything. And, I think that there is a weariness. There is an exhaustion among people that are not seeing the progress that we'd like to see. But I think that what's important is that we embrace one another across all kinds of divisions, including the sectors that we work in, and try to continue the work. Right now, there's been a lot of institutions and so-called leaders that have given up on the work, right? They never really wanted to do it to begin with. And so one of I hate to say this word, but benefits of what we're dealing with right now is that we're seeing who's serious, right? We're seeing who's having these conversations still, right? We're seeing who's reading difficult books and having conversations. We're seeing who's out in the streets, but also who's just bringing things up in their board meeting or in their cabinet meeting or in their department meeting, whatever it is. Who's having these conversations in their classes, right? So I'm an educator, right? So I feel like our educational systems are a critical component for change. And what I see happening is that those institutions that weren't serious are backing away completely. There's a lot of fear, justifiable fear. People are literally getting killed right now for standing, for what they need to stand for, what we all should be standing for. But I think that moral courage and responsibility doesn't change. And I will say this, that's particularly true for folks that look like me. More of us need to step up and not fall into that trap, which has become more of the norm. Like it's been less about moral courage and responsibility being encouraged and more accepting of the idea that if it doesn't affect me and my family, then I don't need to be involved. And then I'm not part of the problem if I just stay out of it. And that's really not the truth. The truth is that if you're doing nothing, you are still part of the problem. And maybe, and I think Dr. King spoke of this repeatedly, then maybe even more of the problem, those that are aware, right? Those that are woke, to use a term we're not supposed to use anymore, that those folks choose not to do anything with the knowledge that they have been blessed with. So I'll leave it at that. But I think that's an important piece for us to think about in our colleges, since we're at a college forum here. We need to have these conversations, and we need to encourage people to act.
Agreed. Rodney, you spoke about it being a blueprint, maybe, and could I invite you to say just a little bit more about that? And where are we on that blueprint? What should we focus on building from that blueprint in the current moment?
Most certainly. I think back to something that the chancellor said when he gave his introduction, that you being an institution that cultivate the students to navigate and shape the world. When Dr. King spoke about life's blueprint, he was speaking to a group of students, and he was trying to instill in them to make sure you live a life with purpose. And and he gave the 3 dimensions of that particular speech he gave to the students was to, commit to a deep belief in one's dignity and worth, determination to achieve excellence, and a commitment to the principles of beauty, love, and justice, things that, that he was promoting as his platform, nonviolence. As far as leadership and the way I think generation leaders should be developed from this point is, and what I have hope, I guess, for the students today, despite the current, what appears to be vast majority, it is not the vast majority of this country. The blueprint that I think people have, for the most part, and something that Dr. Jojo just mentioned, is basically silence. A lot of people are, and Dr. King spoke about that silence and non-action in itself, is action. Silence is not neutral. It has its consequences. So as far as the blueprint, we still got to speak about basically how this conversation started, that Dr. King's legacy is not history to be studied, but is to be lived. And we have to, and especially in institutions, it's not just about teaching students academics. Anyone go to a book and read and study and pass tests and pass, different evaluations, but rather is to instill and the generations to come to think and to be compassionate. One thing about the institutions that we have now, and that we're trying to bring more, I guess, a diverse body. I know some words you got to be careful nowadays, but it's to start a dialogue. That's the best place to really start the conversation, because you got so many people of diverse backgrounds, diverse interests. And so, yeah, they can come there and seek an academic, I guess, foundation. But when you teach them how to think and you teach them what's important, so that is all trying to instill in them to have a blueprint that encompass not just a personal and professional growth, but a love and a caring for mankind. None of us are islands by ourselves, but rather we make up the tapestry of the whole world. And so the blueprint that Dr. King envisioned, again, like I said, what he told those students, and I forgot what grade, but they weren't high school, I think maybe junior high, and it was shortly before his death. And he put out, like I said, basically those three principles from that blueprint. I mean, about for a blueprint, and again, deep belief in one's dignity and worth. That's beyond just getting an education, but how to think, how to develop communications and conversations. Because without communications and conversations, you don't, a society will fail. And so, and then when they have a drive and determination to achieve excellence, which is something that has to be instilled at the institutional level, as well as home or what have you. And then commitment. Again, silence silence does have consequences, bottom line. So when Dr. King spoke of blueprint, again, it's a guidance, it's a commitment.
Great, thank you. And Belinda, I'll throw this next question to you. I think that idea of commitment and action and inaction as an action is really important. And I was wondering if we could kind of go to each of you, and Belinda, we'll start with you, just to talk a little bit about a personal experience that you had that kind of shaped how you think about leadership and service and social, like what's something from your past, from your background that really pushed you into that area of action and helped shape how you approach that?
I love that question, Stephen. Thank you. I'm going to try to be brief, but this is a really personal story for me. When
We
I
have
was
lots of time and we can say the word diversity here. I think we're all safe, so please take your
okay,
time.
this is kind of a heart story for me, but when I was 14 years old, I was selected as a youth representative for the Watha League. And for those of you who are not Lutherans, I was raised a black girl as a Lutheran in the segregated South. I was selected as a youth representative for the Watha League, which was a youth group in the Lutheran Church, to attend a regional youth conference in Florida. And as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in the segregated South. My church was predominantly black, but my pastor and his family were white. And as you can imagine, this was uncommon and a complicated reality in the Jim Crow South. Because the other youth representative was a white girl whose family was driving to Florida, arrangements were made by my mom and my pastor for me to travel separately to join them. So at 14 years of age, my mom was super liberal. She put me on a Greyhound bus by myself from Atlanta to Columbus, Georgia, where I was to meet with this white family. And I was the only black person on that Greyhound bus. A drunken white man boarded last. There was only one seat left on the Greyhound bus, and that was next to me. And he chose to stand up the entire trip. And my little 14-year-old heart was racing, thinking, what am I going to do if this drunk man sits beside me? But fortunately, his racism had him stand up the whole time rather than sit by a little 14-year-old girl on the Greyhound bus. Well, when I arrived in Columbus, the white mother and daughter met me at the bus station, and I thought the arrangements were that I would stay with them that night. But as soon as they picked me up, they immediately explained that I could not stay at their home because their neighbors wouldn't understand them having a young black girl stay at their house. And so they told me other arrangements had been made. As we crossed the railroad tracks, I knew immediately that I was being taken to the home of a black family, which thankfully turned out to be wonderful. It was a black Lutheran family, and they took wonderful care of me that night. The next morning, though, when that white family picked me up and we drove to Florida, as we traveled along the highways and byways, heads were turning left and right. as people stared at this young black girl in a car with an all-white family. When we stopped for lunch, I was told that I could not eat with them, and the father took his fist and slammed it on the counter and insisted that I would. I still remember everybody in that restaurant's head was in slow motion as they turned and looked to say, what the heck is going on? And that was one of the very few moments when someone used their voice and their power on my behalf. But once we arrived in Florida, I discovered I had nowhere to stay. At 14, despite what my mom and pastor had been told, the family simply dropped me off at the church for the conference. I had no money, no lodging, and no plan. And at 14, I was terrified. The only person who stepped forward was the church pianist who owned beach cottages, and she quietly took responsibility, offered me a place to stay with her, and made sure I got to the conference every day. At the conference, I was completely isolated. No one spoke to me. If I opened my mouth during a session, no kids in the room said anything. I couldn't wait to get home. But that experience taught me lessons, to go back to your question, Steve, about leadership, social responsibility, and those things have stayed with me my entire life. I think the first lesson for me was that leadership requires courage and not titles. Nearly everyone in that personal story that I just shared called themselves Christians. Many had positions of authority, but very few were willing to act when doing the right thing carried social risk. The true leaders were the ones who used their voices quietly or boldly when it mattered. The second lesson is that silence is a choice and silence has consequences. And what struck me the most, even as a little 14-year-old kid, was not just the cruelty, but the indifference. Most people did nothing. That taught me early on that injustice is sustained not only by those who act wrongly, but by those who choose comfort over responsibility. The third thing it taught me is that service means taking responsibility when no one assigns it to you. The pianist did not have to help me, no one asked her to. She simply saw a child in need and acted. That moment shaped my understanding of service as something deeply personal and deeply moral. The fourth lesson for me was that adversity reveals strength you don't yet know you have. I thought that family, I was supposed to stay with them in their beach cottage. That didn't happen. They just literally dropped me off. At 14, I learned that I could endure isolation, fear, and humiliation and still keep going. That resilience became foundational to my leadership journey, especially as I later found myself on being the first or the only, like the first African American in Atlanta, in Georgia, to work at the Georgia State Highway Patrol when I was a senior in high school, the first African American to be a little teen model at Rich's, the largest department store in the South. That and sadly, the first African American vice president to be over the college that I am at, the university right now, and the first woman and the first person of color. And finally, the lesson I took from that very painful but experience that has helped to shape me into who I am today is that leadership must be rooted in humanity. Dr. King taught us that justice without compassion is hollow. That experience taught me that leadership without humanity is empty. Titles, affiliations, and beliefs mean very little if they don't translate into action. That experience taught me that leadership is not about who you are when it's easy. It's about who you are when you're standing up for what's right and it will cost something to you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's a lot of lessons for a young woman to be learning at the age of 14. And I think, unfortunately, far too many kids are still in a position to learn some of life's lessons that way. And it's unfortunate that we haven't seen more change, especially as it relates to our young people. One of the things you said that struck me was just you said comfort, people can't choose comfort over responsibility. And I think that's very important for all of us to hear, but I think it's important for institutions to hear. There are so many ways that we can passively continue to operate as a college without really sticking our institutional neck out. And I think that's and we'll get to the question in the Q&A because I kind of want to throw that on you at the end. But I think that's definitely one of the ways we can think about it as an institution is that we have to choose responsibility over comfort. And in the current climate, comfort looks pretty appealing. It feels better to stick your head in the sand and not be touched by a lot of what's happening. And it's unfortunate. Jojo, I'll take it to you, and then Rodney will close this out with you. What's something personally from you? I think those personal anecdotes are really sometimes the most powerful that brought you to this work and shaped your notions of leadership and responsibility.
Yeah, thank you for your reflection on that, Stephen. First, I think it's important to note that what Dr. Biscoe, the story that you told, wasn't that long ago. Right. No matter how many times they make color pictures into black and white and put them in our textbooks, to pretend that these things are, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This was not that long ago. And these same stories are happening over and over again. They happened when I was a kid. They're happening to kids right now. They're happening to my kid right now. Right. I think that's an important note. The other piece that I want to sort of add to that is, Stephen, you brought up that was a tough lesson to learn at 14 for a young person. We often, and when I say we in this case, I'm saying white folks. White folks often talk about when it's appropriate for white kids to talk about these issues, to learn about these issues. And my question is always, whenever a child of color has to learn about it, you should be learning at the same time. And they're learning from day one. My education around these issues centered around my brother, who was adopted and African American. I have way too many stories that I witnessed, that I was a part of, but that were not often targeting me. It's partly why I wrote A Brother's Insight, because as the brother of somebody going through this, I wanted to try to translate this for folks, help them understand what this did to my brother, who we lost to suicide, in part because of what he went through, right? I can't say it was completely, but this certainly weakened his what we call in psychology, his psychological fortitude. And I think, a lot of folks will dismiss my experience because, oh, well, you didn't grow up like regular white folks, right? You're not normal. I hear that a lot. I'm okay with that. don't want to be a normal white person in this case, in this way. But proximity to Blackness in this case, or to folks of color, does not automatically make a person anti-racist. It doesn't automatically give you insights and give you the courage to stand up, unfortunately, right? Unfortunately, what it often does is give people an excuse to say, oh, I'm different. And I think what I learned was that I had to make a conscious choice to act. And that meant learning. It meant reading, right? I remember one of the very first books that I can remember reading cover to cover was the autobiography of Malcolm X. My parents made all three of us, there's three boys, made all of us read Roots, which at the time, if you haven't seen the book, it's a dictionary sized book, right? Which was very daunting for us as children, um, but impactful. And so we have to make a conscious effort to educate ourselves. And in my role today, when I advise presidents, when I advise other folks that particularly the ones that look like me, that have privilege in other ways, what I have to listen to often is them telling me, "Oh, well, I grew up, in this way. I didn't have this exposure and all this kind of stuff." And they're always talking about their childhood. And these are not young people, right? These are folks that for the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years, they've been responsible for their own experiences, their own education, who they hang out with, all the way to, what book they're reading, right? And I think that's an important piece right now, is for us to take personal responsibility, right? And to hold one another accountable, right? And it's one of the things that I think is critical right now. Is it's not just trying to do something myself, it's also holding the people around me accountable, and in a way that is loving, but that I can have influence, right? We have influence in these little spheres that we have of our people, whoever our people are, our colleagues, our friends, our community members, our family. I might be able to be very articulate around these issues, but if somebody doesn't want to hear it, they're not going to hear me. But they might hear it from their sister. They might hear it from their cousin or their workmate, from somebody they respect in the community. That's who has more of an opportunity to get through. So when we don't act, when we don't take that responsibility, it is really damaging, the potential that we have for making progress. So I may have gone off on a tangent a little bit there, but I think that's a critical point right now for all of us to think about. Is it's not just about taking action ourselves, but it's holding one another accountable, and not allowing ourselves to be in the bubble because right now we're not getting arrested. Right now I'm not getting shot in the face, right? Because we can all go back to that. I can't think of the name, Newmiller or something like that. That poem. First they came for whoever, and eventually they coming for my butt, right? That's a quick summary of the poem. It's a little better than that, but we're living in that moment again, right? They're coming for folks right now, and if it isn't you, well, just wait a minute. So you might want to act. You might want to step up now.
I only know that poem from an old punk rock song where there was no one left to watch when they came for me, right? Because everything else had passed by. No, thank you. I think you're bringing to light a lot of the questions we're all wrestling with, and I think that notion of individual responsibility for simply accountability in your own sphere is a good answer to the how question. How can we affect change on some of these very big issues? Ronnie, we'll go to you, and we'll finish this question there. What anything from your past or present that brought you to this work and that fuels you to be a leader and take social responsibility and advocate for these issues?
Sure. As you just mentioned, individual responsibility. Back in junior high school, I, did pretty well and obtaining the academics, studies and what have you. And, particularly like civics and some history, but in the social sciences. And I never forget, I had this vice principal, Mr. Norman, we call him Mr. Norm. He walked the hallways with a pipe tilted out of his side of his mouth. And he was fairly senior African-American male, even at the time. He lived to get, I think, mid-90s and passed away 2019. But many decades prior to that, when I was in junior high school, and he being my personal counsel, called me, put me aside into his office one day. and just reared back in his chair with his pipe, not lit, but I guess profiling, styling and profiling, and said, "Well, what you want to do? What you want to do? What you want to do in life?" I said, "What you mean? What I want to do in life?" I see you seem to be a pretty good young man. I know my students' records and, being part of different societies, the Beta Club and other honor roll societies and what have you. I kind of, was set apart with less than the majority of students. So he recognized me. And I was, thinking then, oh, I'm going to be a police officer. And then better yet, oh, I'm going to be homicide detective. I'm gonna do forensics. Now, where I grew up was in a rural area of Arkansas, fairly rural. The overwhelming majority Caucasian community, and I would told them right off. I said, "Well, I'm gonna be a homicide detective," and this was long before the different the CSI series and what have you were glamorized and was sexy to a vast majority of the public that tune into those type of shows. I thought the forensics and crime scene investigation was going to make my life exciting, and he listened and he and very bluntly, it's enough people doing that. It's enough people that's going to, want to live a life that they think is exciting. That's something you think now. But what is a meaningful purpose that you have in life? I said, well, I'm going to be, seeking justice for the people who, especially homicide, have been unlawfully murdered and all this other stuff. I'm bringing comfort to the family and what have you. And he pointed out to me then, he said, because the pursuit of justice was my desire then and it's my desire now. But he gave me a different spin on the pursuit of justice. Mr. Norman thought I should be a civil rights activist and, go to law school, learn the law to work in my favor as far as taking on civil rights in not necessarily the housing or employment arena, but at the time back in private practice, handling all kinds of matters that, injustice were reared its prominent head during that time in the late 70s, mid 80s. And I was oblivious to it, wasn't really paying attention, playing with classmates and stuff that, were white and black alike. And I didn't really see the whole world, the layout of society. Now, I heard about Dr. King, always wanted to play Dr. King in the plays and different activities we would do. So when Mr. Norman, he said, I think what we failed to realize now, especially being an African-American young male, is that we have arrived somewhere and he pointed out, the civil rights movement is needed to move forward. This is not something that has been an accomplishment, but rather we still need advocates to move forward. So I took a little, time to myself and kind of cogitated upon that and thought that career, where it may not have the glamour and may not seem as exciting or what have you, it was just as righteous to try to save human lives on this side of death. Yeah, you want justice for people who have lost loved ones, but what about the live individuals and the lives of, generations to come? So he, like I said, he instilled in me the realization that, while there was tremendous progress that have been achieved in the civil rights movement thus far, was much more progressive civil rights movement that was still necessary. And sometimes even today, and I've handled numerous matters and in the legal field, that though something may be legal, Jim Crow laws, i.e., though something may be acceptable, doesn't mean that it's morally correct. It could be profoundly wrong. The law may answer the question, but does it address and answer the harm? So just because something is legal doesn't mean it's just. And it was instilled that if not me, who? So that leadership ideology began to be instilled and grown from that point when he called me in his office, and he gave me a couple of Dr. King's quotes, particularly about silence and all this, non-action or omission. Inaction was in fact action. And, Dr. King told us that moral leadership often begins when we choose to have a moral conscience over mere convenience and meager complacement. So that was my initial drive to want to go in the field of advocacy, and where I still currently do it more neutrally, but I still have to be the moderator of what's fair as far as in the workplace.
Thank you so much. And I think I'm going to dip into the Q&A, the comment there, thanking all of you for sharing your personal stories with us. I think parts of each of those stories is hitting home with the audience today, and just thank you for sharing your backgrounds with us. I've got 2 questions left, and they're kind of big questions, so we'll try and pack them into the time we have left. But I want to pull back from the individual for a moment, and I kind of want to challenge all of you to get down in the weeds a little bit with us. I think the other question in the chat, the Q&A is how. How do we do this? And I think sometimes, and I said this before, the enormity of the issue really makes chewing on the how sometimes a very daunting exercise. So I'm going to throw it to you, those of you that work in a school, as tactically as you can, as granular as you can. What are some strategies you think should a community college should engage in to help advance this work? And could be, as you two of you work at colleges, anything from your own university in terms of tactics. How can we begin as institutions to tackle these issues in different ways? And where do you think those big opportunities to tackle issues are? And so I'll open it up. I didn't really have anyone targeted for this. Does anyone want to go first?
Go first. I'm at a community college, and a few things come to mind. First is that the institution needs to model what we'd like to see, right? So an institution that talks a lot about equity and justice but doesn't practice it is not really teaching it. So I think it's important that we model and that we look at everything from our policies and practices to how we teach and what we teach. So that's an obvious one, I would hope, that we are self-reflective in that way. Another thing, a lot of institutions, that are trying to do something right now or want to have dialogues, right? And I think that we do need to have multiple platforms that we engage in all the time, that around dialogue from, both within and external from the classroom. And I think right now it's important to engage those existing dialogue platforms. So if you have a sustained dialogue program, if you have a courageous dialogue program, whatever you might call it, engage with what exists, because people know how to be in those spaces. It's practiced, right? So engaging in those ways, both inside and outside the classroom in this dialogue. And one caution that I would put there is not to fall into the, cable news network way of having a dialogue and debate, where you have to include people that are frankly not legit perspectives, right? I'm all for having a dialogue with people from different perspectives, coming from different experiences. But if you're coming into a dialogue with hate and bigotry, that's not a legitimate perspective, right? We can disagree on things and how to move forward, but if your purpose and your perspective is coming from a place of racism, sexism, homophobia, etc., then that's not dialogue. That's just somebody pushing hate, and you're allowing that at your institution if you engage in that kind of dialogue. Doesn't mean you can't have conservative voices, but although it doesn't look like that sometimes, there are plenty of conservative voices that are not hateful. So I think we need to have those dialogues. I would encourage folks to lean into those platforms that we're already engaged with. And then also, I think, and this sort of speaks to the practices of community colleges, we're often an on-ramp for communities into higher education that have not been engaged in higher education, right? As a first-gen college student, I know there's a psychological barrier there to higher ed. It seems like for other people, right? It wasn't something that I naturally thought, oh, I should be going to college. And if it wasn't for, athletics, I don't know that I would have even been thinking about it. But that's where I got to continue to play ball, right? But I think community colleges play an incredibly important role in providing on-ramps, providing access. And I think if we're very intentional about it, right, we often talk about hyper-local recruitment and pipeline development, right? Looking at neighborhoods and communities that have been neglected, that have folks that have been the victims of the types of discrimination and generational discrimination in particular that Dr. King would speak often about, and making sure that there are opportunities there. And I think, because a lot of people, when they hear, about efforts like that, they start to think, oh, well, you're excluding other people. No, that's not the case. The idea is most of our institutions that are community colleges are open enrollment. We're saying, hey, come on. And inviting more people to the table is not excluding anybody, right? So I think that's another important piece, is to reach out, to bring people in, have culturally dynamic and responsive practices so that folks not only feel like they belong, but they are reflected both in the faculty and the curriculum. And their voices matter, and they understand that their voices matter at the institution. That goes back to the modeling. So I think those are a few of the ways. I could go on. I'll resist the urge, but there are many
for hours, right?
Yeah, but there's many ways community colleges, higher ed in general, even schools can have a very big impact right now, right? And I think that's a whole other conversation. But I encourage people to be engaged in that conversation, whether or not they're in higher education or not. Bring us in, call us, bring us to the table. We have a lot to offer, and we can help to create change directly and through our educational work.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I,
that's one of the. Oh, I'm sorry, Melinda. I was
no,
just
I
going to
was
say.
just gonna say amen to what Jojo said. I couldn't agree with that more, and would just add a couple of things, because I do agree with him 100% that institutions like Oakland Community College are really uniquely positioned to support dialogue and progress because of the mission that you have. You exist to provide access, foster opportunity, strengthen communities, and that work basically requires people engaging from different backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences. But I think being intentional about creating those spaces for dialogue is, to me, what becomes important. And I want to emphasize, for me, dialogue, not debate, not division, but dialogue, especially in today's polarized climate. And for me, respectful engagement doesn't happen by accident. I think it has to be designed, facilitated, and supported. And I think community colleges like Oakland Community College can take the lead in hosting structured conversations, learning forums, classroom experiences. Today on this panel, Rodney, JoJo, and we all shared some deeply personal experiences that allowed us to connect with each other, hopefully to connect with the audience. And I think community colleges and other colleges creating opportunities to learn about these unique experiences and personal stories that everybody brings to their community college or to their university personalizes who we all are. And I think it's through those connections and those personal experiences that we're really able to create empathy and understanding with people who may be different from us in a variety of ways, because hearing those stories, and we don't often, even in college or at our universities, have an opportunity to hear those rich stories that are shaped by people's work or their family responsibilities or their migration or their military service or their economic hardship. But I think creating opportunities to share those stories through classrooms, panels, community events, it helps to humanize our differences and helps to move us beyond assumptions and what I may think about Stephen or what I may think about Rodney or JoJo, to really moving me towards understanding who you are. And so, Dr. King had this concept that he called a beloved community. And that notion of a beloved community, I see Rodney smiling, calls us to engage across differences, not to win arguments, but to build justice, dignity, and shared responsibilities. And I think, especially when community colleges live their mission fully, they don't just educate students, they strengthen the civic fabric of the communities that they serve as well. So, just building on what JoJo said about dialogue, really important.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to go a little off script and I'm going to take the last two questions and kind of mash them into one to give you each the last word. And Rodney, will go to you first. But I think to close out, the question is, what keeps you up at night right now? And to close, what gives you hope? Because I think sometimes day to day, especially in the past year, hope has been in short supply. And so that's my last question to each of you. What's keeping you up? And we only have a few minutes, so I know that probably is several hours as well. But what's keeping you up? And to finish, I think it's always good to end on a message of hope. So what gives you hope? And Rodney, I'll give you the floor first, and we'll kind of go around the horn one last time.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. And let me just begin by saying I appreciate, like at the start said, this opportunity to come together and have this dialogue. And, continuing the dialogue is the first step. We can't lose hope. And because of the circumstances that we see now, if we're going to keep Dr. King's legacy alive, which if we're going to continue to make progress in this country, we have to ascribe to the tenets of his vision. I think today, and we have history that shows us that a lot of movements have been started on campuses across the country, across this nation for various reasons. And so I think when you speak of educational institutions like OCC and what have you, you have a student body there that is anxious to make a difference. And if it's not at large, it's most certainly within their family. They're seeking to better themselves and to be an important resource in society as a whole. So I don't think anyone come to school with the ideology of complacent. They're coming there to improve. And, I started out by saying the community and unity and community is very important. And so I think just coming to the educational setting, they're seeking knowledge and having the opportunity to teach them to think and drive for a better society. I think the most important message that justice requires action. It's just that simple. We have a choice and we have a voice, and to make society better. As I stated earlier, silence is not neutral. It has its consequences. Dr. King warned us about the danger of silence, and progress and justice does not, it's not just destined to happen, but rather is the result of people choosing to act with courage, compassion, persistence. And I think, again, though it may seem somewhat dismal considering the current political climate, people are paying attention. People are recognizing and they're shifting their polarization, and maybe it's not completely coming to the other side. They're coming more so to the middle, and they're coming to where they can try to find a common ground, because some people know what's going on. It's an attempt to recline us back into history, and they don't want that as well. The majority of people, I don't believe in this nation, want us to go back whence we come. So whenever justice, you see injustice, speak up loud and clear. Speak up through action. And what I mean by that, voting is an action. Applying economic pressure is action that we all have within our arsenal. Join groups that pressure legislators to do the correct thing and be accountable. Moral, just values, unionize, whatever it takes. And as educators, administrators, students, and community members, our responsibility is not just to admire Dr. King's legacy, but to continue it and live it out by building institutions and communities that reflect dignity, equity, and humanity that he envisioned.
Thank you so much. Dr. Biscoe, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would say as a kid who grew up under Jim Crow and segregation, what keeps me up at night is turning back the hands of time. I just feel that things that I lived through and grew up with, never in my wildest imagination did I ever feel that I would feel I had been pushed back in time. And that's how I feel these days, that I've been pushed back in time to things that I thought I would never, never, ever experience. So I'll just leave it at that. I also want to say what gives me hope or a lot of things, but I want to put a little addendum. When I was a college freshman, I was coming from Nashville, hopping off the plane. As I hopped off the plane, I ran right into Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I was astounded, in awe, and overwhelmed. I walked up to him, put out my hand, and had an opportunity to say thank you, thank you, thank you for everything you're doing for people like me. And I still feel to this day his hand in my hand, and the humility. I think the thing that I'll never forget is just the humility that I saw in his face when he saw a little college student, freshman college student, come up to him and say those words to him, almost as though he were in shock that someone as young as I was, it had a clue about what was even going on. And so keeping that moment close to my heart has carried me all these years. And I'm hopeful today because of what I see in the next generation, despite what many people might say. I think they see the world differently. I think they're less willing to accept injustice is that's just the way it is. The way I grew up in the South is that's just the way it is. We're blacks and whites, and people are different have to be separated. I think young people today are more comfortable navigating difference than my generation was at the same age because we were separated. And so when I, as a black kid, came in contact, the white kids at Six Flags wanted to know where are the black kids partying, because the rumor was all the black kids know how to party and we want to come to your parties. There was so much misunderstanding about who we are and who we were as young people. I don't think there's as much of that today. I think the most important message that gives me hope, that I hope we continue to carry forward today from Dr. King, is that justice requires sustained moral courage and not occasional outrage. And I think JoJo and Rodney and Belinda, I think we've all put that out there, that sustained moral courage and action is what will continue to give all of us hope.
Thank you. I think that came through loud and clear today, and I appreciate that. Dr. McManus will give you the final word.
I'll say amen to what Rodney and Belinda have just shared. What keeps me up and what gives me hope are the same thing. And that's my daughter. I'm a dad. I have a 15-year-old. Michaela Imani McManus is what keeps me up at night, worrying about her and what she's having to live through right now. And she gives me hope because she's a beautiful soul. And I look at her and her friends, and I think back to when she was in preschool. And a quick story, when I was taking her to school one day, and she said something about, she couldn't wait to see all of her friends. And she had just started there. And I said, "Oh, do you have a lot of friends?" And she goes, "They're all my friends." And I said, "Wow, that you made friends quickly." And she goes, "Well, they don't all know I'm their friend yet, that we're friends yet." So whenever I think about her friends, I'm thinking about her generation, right? Give me hope. But I have hope in people. I really do. And whatever sector we're thinking about, I think about leaders like Mamdani and Crockett and AOC and Ayanna Pressley and Ilhan Omar, people like that. They give me hope, right? Because they're doing what they can, right? They're stepping up in a public life, which is difficult. I think of, voices on podcasts and television and, the Mark Lamont Hills and Angela Rise of the world and authors, right? When I was writing my book, I read so much because I wanted to make sure that I was, better educated than I could, I thought I was. And, everybody from Ruha Benjamin to Heather McGee and, Blair Amani and a lot of young folks that are on social media teaching us, right? And the people who read their books and listen and learn. I think they give me hope, and also those organizations that represent us as a collective, like Bird's World, which is like this great collective of women of color who are authors and bring beautiful voices together. The D2K community, which is a group of folks that do the kind of work I do in inclusive excellence, diversity, and inclusion. And associations like NADIHI, which is the diversity officers in higher ed, and conferences like the White Privilege Conference and NCORE, the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. Thank you, Dr. Bisco, which needs to continue, by the way.
It will.
I love it. It absolutely will. But NCORE is another one of those things. There's all these beautiful organizations and collectives and individuals that are doing brilliant work out there, and staying in community with them is what feeds me and gives me hope. And so I just met Rodney, but I see it in him, and I already know it's there with Dr. Bisco. I'm blessed to be able to call Belinda a friend. And I that's what gives me hope every day are the people, right? Because we will win, right? In this struggle, we will. The question is not about if; it's about when, right? So I'll leave it there. And thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great place to end. And number of, unfortunately, we're a little bit long on time, but a number of comments in the Q&A. Just thanking you all for sharing and your candor. I'd like to thank you for participating with us today and your honesty and your forthrightness. I think it's hard to get to these honest conversations. Sometimes we have to kind of soft dance the language so much. And so it was really refreshing just to hear your honest perspectives. And so thank you. I've got a lot of pages of notes, got a lot of things circled. So no shortage of work to do, but when, not if. I think that's a great way to end today. So thank you so much for indulging me. And to close out the day, I'll give it back to Christina Marshall to bring us home. But thank you so much.
And thank you,
Thank you.
Stephen. You're a great moderator for us.
Yes.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Nicely
Thank
done.
you.
All right. So at this time, I want to thank our leadership, and especially our Chancellor, Peter Provenzano, for leading us and encouraging all of us to continue to lead with courage, and all of our Executive Council members as well. I would also like to thank each one of our panelists for their words of encouragement and for providing us the opportunity to have something to look forward to in terms of hope. And as you could see, we got lots of messages. So we thank each and every one of you for being here today. And thank you to our interpreters who have done a phenomenal job as well to ensure that everyone can enjoy today's program. So thank all of you. We will see you again next year. Thanks, everyone.